Hello, this is part one of a series of videos that I'm doing about Diablo 3 farming and crafting. It's mainly aimed at the casual player. There are lots of videos on YouTube about farming and they all seem to relate to people that play a lot of Diablo 3. I think the general rule is that if you play a lot of it, you're going to get a lot of gear anyway. I wondered if as a casual player, there was perhaps a more efficient way of getting the materials, because that's what it's all about. You get the materials, you craft, that's how you get better gear. So this first video is all about an introduction to the actual materials that we're looking at and whether there's any tips and tricks concerning those. Subsequent parts of the video will look at efficient methods of actually farming and what builds are a good idea and what aren't. So first thing is we're going to look at is when you get to level 70 plus, these are the materials that are available. I've ignored Hellfire materials. Some of the changes that have been made to Diablo 3 have essentially rendered those redundant for a lot of builds. I play Demon Hunter, so some of the amulet changes means that you don't really need a Hellfire amulet anymore. And the Hellfire rings were generally poo-pooed a long time ago. So that saves a bit of time and effort, because you haven't got to worry about collecting the keys and battling the bosses to get the parts. So I'm ignoring that. So when you get to 0 to 70, regular, magic and rare items, these ones here are going to be the interesting ones. And it's generally exciting when you get a rare item that makes everything green, because you haven't got to consider anything about secondary affixes or mysterious magical properties that proc other magical properties. So that first part of the game is actually genuinely thrilling. But it only takes about 2 hours, 3 hours at a push, because there's lots of tips and tricks you can do to really get that leveling up really fast. Because then when you reach level 70, things get interesting. Imperial gems start to drop for a start. One of those will be the gem for the main stat for the character. For Demon Hunter, that's Emerald. But nonetheless, they'll drop. We need those in crafting, so you have to have Imperial gems in crafting. Also, while you're playing the game, regular, magic, rare, and after you reach level 70, increasingly more likely are legendary and set gear. You can get set gear before that, and you can get legendary before that, but they aren't really viable parts except to help with the leveling. You can also then get reusable parts, arcane dust, veil crystal and forgotten souls from those items there. So reusable parts comes from regular items, arcane dust comes from magic items, veil crystal comes from rare items, and forgotten souls come from legendary and set gear. Death's breaths, they come from killing elites, and you also get them in the erratic cache chests, and depending on which act you've completed means that you get the rune, the nightshade, tapestry, angel flesh and holy water. Gold drops from just about everywhere once you get Boon of the Hoarder by killing the boss in the vault. Bloodshards come from goblins. There's some in the chest, and you sort of wander around collecting those. So those are the crafting materials and items that I'm going to be looking at. So, general salvage rules are as follows. White, reusable parts, blue, arcane dust, yellow, veil crystal. Legendary and set items become forgotten souls. We'll get those out of the way first of all. You get 1 if it's standard legendary, 3 if it's ancient, and 15 if it's primal ancient. You will be trashing primal ancient items because you'll get some stupid belt that you're never going to use. Trash it to get 15 forgotten souls. Right, here's the first tip. Don't collect yellows when you're picking up other stuff that gets dropped. Don't bother with them. You only get 1 veil crystal per yellow item, so it's not a very efficient use of space in your inventory. Whites and blues, well, the whites you get between 5 and 10, and the blues you get between 1 and 7. That's done the range might actually be different to that. It's just that when I was doing a bit of looking at this and making a few notes and doing a bit of testing, every white I dismantled came between 5 and 10. And it's not, there's no particular rhyme or reason to it. A belt could be worth 10 and chest armor could be worth 5. So it's random when the item is salvaged at the blacksmith. Similarly for blues, I did the same thing. I salvaged a few and they range between 1 and 7. So in terms of space in your inventory, whites are the most efficient. So collect whites is a good rule. Where from is an obvious question. Well, if you're a bit hardcore about things, you can play through the main campaign, the main story, and when you get to Act 5, you can talk to the Templar and he'll give you a side quest. You go on that side quest, you run through the Templar HQ, and there are lots of whites in there, about 14 or 15 whites. You don't complete it, so you don't talk to the guy in the chair at the end. You quit the game, you restart the game, you talk to the Templar, you keep running that quest again and again and again and again and again. And you can get a lot of whites that way. But you only get whites and the occasional yellow, which you'll tut at. So that's one way to get whites, but it isn't the most efficient way. There are plenty of videos on that Templar event to watch, but I wouldn't do that. Act 1, if you're doing bounties anyway, and you're in Act 1 and you see there's a quest in Leo Expander's courtyard, go and do that. You run in, up the stairs, turn right into the room, go straight through the double doors out into the outside bit, and then if you go down, so sort of southeast, there's a little building, and in that building are always 6 whites. There's also a shield, a storm shield, hidden in the walls. You don't get any extra for that. I thought it would be nice if that gave you like 15 or something, because it's like a special item, but it doesn't. The whole distribution of reusable parts is random when you trash it at the blacksmith. So you could run and get that, but you might be in the area anyway because of the quest, but you can get a few whites there. Temple of the Firstborn level 1 is much more interesting because not only do you get armor racks, quite a lot of armor racks where the whites come from, you also get a lot of chests to open, and that's where the blues come from. So that's quite nice. That may well be a boss fight at the end of that, or at the start, depending on when you do of that particular bounty. Act 5 has got Battlefields of Eternity, which is probably the best. Lots of little armor piles lying around. You can almost fill up your inventory with whites if you do that. You just got to be careful to make sure no one completes an act and you lose the chest when it drops. But that's a good place to get whites. And when you build up a nice collection of whites, you can then use the cube to convert them to veil crystals. So you can use 100 reusable parts plus 1 death breaths plus a rare item to show that you want veil crystal, gives you 100 veil crystals, which is essential because the recipes are very light on the blues and whites, but very heavy on the veil crystals, as we'll see in a minute. Gold drops from everything, Bloodshards from the goblins, death breaths from elites. I've already mentioned that. So let's have a look at, this is for general play. This applies to bounties and it applies to rifts and it applies to the main campaign as well. So if you're working towards the Templar event, you're still going to be picking up stuff. For bounties, there are specific items. You get gold, blood shards, and death breaths anyway. Act 1, that's a good place to get Ring of Raw Grandeur. Act 2, illusory boots and maybe gloves of worship. Act 3, maybe Pride's Fall. Avarice Band certainly. Act 4 is a mixture from the other acts. And Act 5, nothing at all, I don't think. But you have to do the acts to get the Rune, Nightshade, Tapestry, Flesh and Water, which are essential crafting materials. So you're going to be doing all the acts anyway. Now, straight out the box, the most efficient way to do that is to do that multiplayer. What I do is I start a game, I begin the first quest in an act, and then I open the game to the public. And by the time I finish the first quest or halfway through the second one, I've got 4 other players who are all off doing bounties. So it's extremely important and much more efficient to do the bounty quests group multiplayer. Rifts, another thing. Greater rifts, another discussion. But bounties, do the multiplayer regardless, because you're going to do them a lot faster. So we've collected some bits, we've converted, we've now got a stash of things. Let's look at how much it costs to spend them. Well, for enchanting, that's where you have an item and you take one of its affixes and change it for another. Armour and weapons, 5 of the dust, 15 of the crystal, which is really annoying because you only get 1 from each yellow item when you salvage it. 1 soul and 1 breath. Amulets and rings, 5 of the dust again. It drops 5 for the crystal to 10, and then 1 of each of the souls and the breaths, plus an imperial gem. So there's no point doing any enchanting really until you're level 70 and above, because that's when the imperial gems drop. And even then, maybe there's no point doing it then either. Essentially, the idea is for Diablo is that you get a character, you get a build, and you try and make that build work by getting the pieces that you want. So the build becomes viable to play, and then you spend the rest of the game upgrading the various completed builds that you've made through either general item drops or from crafting. Now, upgrading a rare to perhaps a legendary, and there's a chance for ancient and primal when you do that. It's 50 of each of the basic crafting materials plus 25 death breaths, so quite expensive. Converting a set item, we'll get that out of the way straight away. Converting a set item is 10 death breaths and 10 forgotten souls. Quite expensive, and when you've got a 6-piece set, you might get lucky and convert the spare one into the bit you're missing, or it might just roll on and keep making helms and not the bit that you want. So converting a set item is a bad idea, really. Quite expensive. Reforging a legendary, ka-ching, 5 of each of the cash, the bounty cash materials, plus 50 forgotten souls. And remember, you get 1 from each legendary item and 3 from an ancient and 15 from primal. So costly. Extracting a power, bit nicer. 1 of each of the bounty item materials and 5 death breaths. So that's quite good. It's essential anyway. It's a good way to buff the character. It's an essential way to buff the character. You find an item like Avarice Band and you extract the power, and then you add that to your character via the cube. So you're going to be doing that. In fact, a lot of the builds, all of the builds, only become viable once you've done that. So you're going to be doing that. So that's a completely legitimate expenditure of your materials. You have to extract powers. Now, what do we do generally then? Well, generally, you don't spend anything. I don't spend anything. That 0 to 70 is 2 to 3 hours. It's a bit of a rush. It's quite fun because the items you pick up genuinely make a difference, and you haven't got to think too much about what procs what. When you get to 800 Paragon points, 3 of the 4 Paragon tabs are maxed out, and after that you're dumping the Paragon points into your main stat, maybe vitality and maybe movement speed as well. But once you get above 800, it's just a grind. So I got a character at about 1,000, just over 1,000, and thought, what is the most efficient way for me to collect material so that I can then do the upgrading and the reforging to make the bits I've got in my build better. And that's the main purpose of this set of videos that I'm doing. Now, first rule mentioned several times is don't spend your bits, because you're going to be playing the game for about 3 months or so for a season, and during that time items will drop anyway, And it's really annoying if you've just burnt through 1,000 Forgotten Souls reforging a legendary item to get an excellent ancient Yang's recurve, only to find that 3 days later a primal one drops anyway. So once your character is at a state where it can comfortably handle Torment 16 farming, that is when you absolutely must not spend your materials. So before Torment 16, you can spend materials to craft items for some of the sets, for example, and you can maybe spend a bit of time because you've got a feeling that you're going to get a primal upgrading your weapon or changing something. That's great. But once you've got a viable build for Torment 16, then you start hoarding. Remember that Bloodshards are great because you can do Bloodshards and lots and lots of legendaries can drop from that, and primals too, in addition to the yellow items for Veil Crystals. So that's another reason why you don't need to collect the yellow items when you're running about, because you're going to get a lot anyway from the Bloodshards. So yeah, more on that in the next couple of videos. So I was generally wondering whether, if I was going to spend 2 hours playing the game, whether there was a particular combination of rifts, greater rifts and bounties that would work better for me, or whether there was a certain build that was actually going to be better. So if I was going to reforge and upgrade and use materials early on in the game, am I better making, can I do that in order to get a set that improves my farming capabilities? And that's what we're going to be looking at. So any questions, any comments, stick them in the comments. Like and subscribe, that would be helpful. Then you'll get notifications of when these other videos are going to appear. And thanks for watching.